This is John Howell Essential Cuts, your daily rundown of the best from today's show on 890 WLS.
Reading from my next guest piece, which I saw at the Daily Herald, to advance the story, he covered it as well as anybody. The utility company responsible for a water system failure that left residents and businesses in and around Hawthorne Woods without drinkable water for days last month. They finally publicly apologized and offered some gift cards. Russell Lissau from the Daily Herald, what exactly did they apologize for?
Boy, a whole bevy of things, John, and thank you again for having me on. What happened in early July, it was July 4th weekend, July 2nd. Sunday, July 2nd, there was a water system failure that left about 1,200 Aqua Illinois customers without drinkable water and left many of them with no water at all. It took days to find out what the problem was and then days to fix it. When all was said and done, the problem began on July 2nd, and everybody didn't get the all clear until July 11th that they had drinkable water again. It was an absolute crisis in the Hawthorne Woods, Killdeer, and Southern Lake County area. And the company, unfortunately, responded slowly. They admitted during a special board meeting in Hawthorne Woods on Monday night that they didn't recognize the problem for 2 days. They didn't recognize the severity of the problem for 2 days, and that delayed the response to this crisis.
That was 500 gallons per minute, right?
In one of the spots, yes, 500 gallons per minute in one of the breaks. There were several breaks. This was a cascading problem throughout the Aqua Illinois system. Their communications with the residents affected was very poor, and people were upset about that. Customer service was poor. Virtually anything that the company could have done in response to this emergency, they did wrong, and they apologized for it at this meeting on Monday.
Were they reading from prepared statements, or was this? Did they seem contrite?
You're asking me to give an opinion on that. It seemed contrite. They seemed sincere about it, if that's what you're asking. It was also very late, for the company to take this long, almost a month, to apologize for misleading people so badly.
Well, how do they mislead people? Because if I was a company executive, I'd say, look, we have very corrosive soil here. We didn't install these pipes. We inherited this system, basically, and we didn't realize the break was this big until 2 days after the fact. I know we're a little late to respond, but here's a $100 gift card.
Yeah, they didn't. The residents didn't take to that too kindly. The $100 gift card. Especially since you printed that they're arriving in their mailboxes this week. Make sure you pick up your mail early in the day, folks. Right, and those cards haven't yet arrived. People say.
Yeah.
But you asked, how did they mislead people? In the early days of this crisis, and I wrote about it for nearly 11 straight days.
Right.
In the early days of this crisis, Aqua Illinois' statements to residents were to conserve water, and they blamed it on the drought. This had nothing to do with the drought, and water conservation wouldn't have made a difference at all.
Yeah.
Not watering your lawns or taking shorter showers would not have made a difference with this particular problem.
Is the Illinois Commerce Commission involved in this?
Yes, they are. They've launched, back in July, they launched what was described to me as an informal investigation into what happened and why it happened and what the company's response was. And that is continuing, the ICC told me this week.
Russell, thank you for popping on with an update on this continuing story. We appreciate it, sir. Have a great afternoon. Are you going to Lollapalooza?
I am not going to Lollapalooza. I was actually at the second Lollapalooza, the second year in Miami, Florida, and have not been to one since. I think I'm a little old for that now.
You saw Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie at that first one, right?
They had just invented brass instruments at that time.
Russell, thank you for your time, sir. We'll read more in the Daily Herald.
You're listening to John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
Well, here we go. It was about 24 hours ago, I think, that we saw Jack Smith jump up on that podium and stand behind that lectern and announcing, yes, additional indictments against Donald J. Trump.
As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election.
And if you read it, and I urge everybody to read it, it's 45 pages, double space. It's not very long at all. Start on page 4 and 5 if necessary. And he lays out essentially what he thinks happened and how Trump will have to defend himself against these charges.
Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues.
Okay, handed up yesterday. 4 felony counts. 1, conspiracy to defraud the United States. 2, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Number 3, obstruction of an attempted obstruction of an official proceeding. And number 4, conspiracy against rights. We're going to need some clarification on that one for sure. Let's start with Royal Oakes, ABC News legal analyst, joining us from Los Angeles. Royal, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Hey, my pleasure. Yeah, big day yesterday, and as you suggest, people are sorting through this 45-page indictment, trying to figure out what it all means for Donald Trump.
Because Trump is the only defendant here, there are unindicted co-conspirators. We know 5 of the 6 for sure. I think Steve Bannon is number 6. That's just conjecture. But since there's no insurrection count, no incitement count, essentially, all of this focuses on Donald Trump knowing his claims of a stolen election were completely bogus, but he still facilitated a fraud. That's what this is based on?
Yeah, exactly. And it is interesting that there's no explicit incitement count. There is a reference in the language of the indictment along the lines of Donald Trump's speech sort of laid the groundwork for this. But the special counsel, Jack Smith, is definitely not trying to say he incited a riot. And, of course, in a sense, he probably backed off of that because of the line in Trump's speech where he said, I want you to all walk peaceably down to the Capitol. And, of course, there was nothing peaceable about it. But in that sense, it was a bit of a surprise. And instead, as you suggest, the real focus of the case is Donald Trump's state of mind. And I think Jack Smith is going to try to assemble evidence from Mike Pence, who wrote contemporaneous notes during multiple meetings from basically Christmas 2020 through January 6th, where Donald Trump said, for example, you're too honest, Mike. The idea is to prove that Trump knew that he really didn't have a legal basis to stand on.
The violence of January 6th, if not incited by Donald Trump, it certainly wasn't spontaneous. I heard some claims made by some legal analysts last night that it wasn't an end result or spontaneous of everything, but it was really definitely part of a conspiracy. They needed January 6th, the proceedings delayed for their own purposes to bring in fake electoral counts, correct? Or votes, I should say.
Yeah, and that's an interesting aspect. It's sort of subtly distinct from the idea of inciting a riot. Maybe Donald Trump didn't encourage people to go, burn down a building. But to the extent the plan was for folks to march on the Capitol to such a degree and to such an extent that the counting was put off, that people had to abandon their battle stations inside Congress, that certainly is something that Jack Smith could try to prove. I think it like the incitement count, would be hard to do because it would be hard to draw the definite link between, okay, we want folks to sort of stream toward the Capitol. We don't know exactly what they're going to do, but we want them to do something that will so interfere with the process that they won't be able to count and we'll get a delay and maybe we can send stuff back to the states. That's hard to prove. You can have a sort of an atmospheric argument in a trial, but the explicit statutes that Trump is accused of are different. There are things like obstruction of justice, obstruction of U.S. Legal processes based on the idea of trying to get Pence to send things back to the states, having fake slates of electors. Those are the hardcore statutory elements that are being advanced by Jack Smith against Trump.
That analysis belongs to Royal Oakes, ABC News legal analyst in Los Angeles, lending some time to us here in Chicago. I hear a lot of people on the right say this is all about quashing the First Amendment. Can you explain why that doesn't necessarily fit?
Yeah, so the argument is that Donald Trump had a right to speak about these things. And even in the indictment, Jack Smith is upfront about the fact that I'm not saying that I'm charging him because he lied when he said that I won the election. Smith acknowledges it's not a crime to lie and say to the American public or anybody else, doggone it, I won the election, everybody knows it, and we're going to prove it in court. Even if he knew it was a lie, that's not a crime. The crime comes when you take steps to implement the lie and convince somebody like Mike Pence or alternative electors to break the law and have them sign statements saying Trump won fair and square and I am the legitimate elector. So, yeah, it's a free speech issue. On the other hand, if the free speech is intended to bring about the violation of a statute, that's when the free speech ends and the criminal liability begins.
Can't Trump just say, and he only needs one juror to agree with him, I believed Rudy and the Kraken lady and Eastman. I just believed what they were telling me. I was commander-in-chief. I thought it was my constitutional duty to hold up this transfer of power.
Yep, he can say that. A couple of problems with it. First of all, Trump doesn't follow legal advice really well, so he probably won't go that route. Instead, he seems insistent on continuing to say, I won the election, I was cheated. The American public does not believe that, and certainly the jurors in Washington, D.C., and by the way, D.C. went 92-5 for Biden over Trump, so they're not exactly Trump fans that were going to be on this jury. As you say, you only need one. But if you're going to pitch the idea that I really won the election, nobody's buying that. Instead, he would be much smarter to simply say, I was following legal advice. Who knows if that is, in fact, the strategy he'll pursue.
Well, doesn't that cover him if, in fact, he throws Rudy and I forgot her name.
Sidney Powell and
Powell.
Professor John Eastman,
right.
The constitutional. Well, you're right. It can work if he throws him under the bus. The problem is because we know that Rudy and John Eastman are unindicted co-conspirators number 1 and 2, they could throw Trump under the bus. You know that Jack Smith isn't going to put them in the same courtroom as Donald Trump because Smith is smart enough to know that a jury might look at the three of them and say, oh, I don't really feel comfortable putting a former president in prison, but doggone it, Rudy and John Eastman belong there. And now Smith can go to Rudy and Eastman and say, hey, let's see, Rudy, you're 79, John, you're 63. Do you really want to spend the rest of your time in prison, a life sentence, or would you like to tell us what you really know about Donald Trump, knowing he didn't have a legal leg to stand on? Then we can talk turkey about your plea deal, and Donald Trump gets thrown under the bus.
Any timetable on perhaps charges being brought on any of the unindicted co-conspirators?
No guess on that. I think that probably Smith, to the extent he doesn't want them in the same courtroom as Donald Trump, will have a decent interval of time to pass, because otherwise if he indicted them tomorrow, people would say, oh, why didn't you put them in the same court, in the same case as Donald Trump? So it'll probably be weeks or months down the road, again, after Smith and his folks have an opportunity to have a serious talk with the unindicted co-conspirators.
Now, the Trump world hates Jack Smith, but the fact is he's a lifelong Republican and a pretty tough prosecutor. That's his record, like it or not. In the case of the judge, however, and this is a political question, explain to us how this case fell under her gavel, and is it politically a problem that she was appointed to the bench by Obama?
Yeah, my understanding is that a magistrate judge will be handling tomorrow's arraignment where Trump shows up and he pleads not guilty. I have not heard that a name has been attached as the actual judge who would try the case, as opposed to the magistrate judge who would handle the logistics of the proceeding tomorrow. In the District of Columbia, you have a federal court district with 13 judges. You have many more senior judges, but 13 active judges. 9 were appointed by Obama, 4 were appointed by Trump. So automatically you've got, it isn't quite 92% to 5%, but it's a pretty hefty advantage for the Democrat appointees. And some people say, Royal, why are you talking about this? Justice is blind. Well, the fact of the matter is we all know judges tend to vote in high-profile, politically oriented cases the way the presidents who appointed them on the federal bench would like them to vote. That's just the statistical fact. I'm not saying judges are dishonest, but, yeah, Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. could have an uphill battle.
Pardon my ignorance, but can't somebody get a Trump-appointed judge to oversee this case?
No, what happens is that they choose a judge by random. They literally spin a wheel.
Lottery.
And so, there's a 4 out of 13 chance that the federal judge, not the magistrate judge, will be assigned to handle this case. Now, we know from the Miami case, a Trump appointee, Aileen Cannon, is handling that case. And although she said, hey, we're going to have a trial in May of next year, probably that'll get moved. And Democrats are unhappy that she's made some pro-Trump rulings. In the case of Washington, D.C., it's still up in the air, as I understand it, as to who's going to be handling the case.
In all of these indictments, New York, Florida, now D.C., do any of these hit the courtroom before the election?
It's unlikely for this reason. Donald Trump is facing some statutory allegations that arguably are a little bit flaky. For example, yesterday in the indictment, there's a statute, obstruction of proceedings, that traditionally has been used only regarding destruction of documents that was illegal to do. Well, that's not this case. Another statute Jack Smith relied on was a statute involving stealing money from the federal government. That is irrelevant as well. Now, there are some judges that have broadly interpreted these statutes, so maybe Jack Smith will be on solid ground. But at the moment, Donald Trump may have an opportunity to go to the trial judge and then a court of appeals above the trial court judge and maybe the Supreme Court with an argument that before you seat a jury and everybody spends millions of dollars and a huge amount of time trying this case, let's determine whether or not these statutes really are appropriate. So this is an early appeal called an interlocutory appeal. And if Trump wins that argument, and the Supreme Court might help him out, then that could put things off until 2025. And at that point, he's probably saying to himself, well, I can pardon myself or get my new attorney general to dismiss the cases.
Boy, that'd be some interesting historical territory, wouldn't it be?
Absolutely. We're in uncharted territory in every respect on the Trump deal.
But it's interesting. And so far, our institutions have held. The process is working. The wheels of justice may grind slow, but they grind on. Final question. Again, this is kind of a political question, parlor game, and you've been very, very generous with your time. Do you think Merrick Garland would have called Jack Smith to handle any of these federal charges or alleged crimes, beginning with the document case, if it wasn't for the document case? In other words, this thing is 2.5 years ago, all of this. Even the January 6th committee didn't finish up until recently. I realize that. But do you think any of this would be now happening if it wasn't for the sloppy storage of documents?
Yeah, I think it would. I think everything really would have gone down the way it has because they're independent in a way. Certainly the Stormy Daniels case by the state court prosecutor is separate and distinct. We know that the Georgia DA is probably going to indict Trump in the next week or two. And, we know that everybody's been talking for over 2 years about how maybe Donald Trump acted illegally in terms of inciting a riot or pressing legal positions that lacked any merit. So, yeah, I think it all would have gone down this way. It's fascinating that it's going to be one trial after another next year. At the same time, there's one primary after another, then a convention and an election. So it's going to be a very busy year for Donald Trump.
I've used a lot of your time. Thank you, Royal. We'll talk to you again.
You bet. Thanks. Royal
Oakes, ABC News legal analyst out there in Los Angeles, joining us here on Double the L.
This is John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
We've touched on this a few times over the last couple weeks. Rick Hogan wrote about the event a while ago, and now the event has happened at the Old Town Ale House right there on North, just west of Wells. 50 years ago, columnist Mike Royko, the legend, staged a beer tasting test among his friends in his backyard to prove just how bad American beer was compared with import brands, just how bad it was compared with import brands. So he wrote in a 1973 Chicago Daily News column that, quote, American beer tastes as if it's brewed through a horse. So a number of people got together, including our next guest, and they recreated this test. Royko's beer test 50th anniversary at the Old Town Ale House, and it happened last weekend. They had readings of Royko's columns. They had a fine local musician playing an accordion because Royko wrote many times that he thought accordion was the best instrument to play in a tavern in Chicago. And, of course, he grew up above a tavern, I believe, on Milwaukee Avenue, so he knows of what he wrote. Well, believe it or not, some of the results were different 50 years later. Let's welcome Liz Garibay. She's executive director of the Chicago Brewseum, which organized the event along with the Newberry Library and the Pocket Guide to Hell. And surprisingly, or maybe not, I've always enjoyed this brand. I used to be an endorser for this brand, actually. Wisconsin-based Old Style won first place from a panel of 12 judges. Let's just start there. Was that a surprise? And if so, it was a reversal from the results of Royco's test 50 years ago. Why do you suppose that was, Liz?
I mean, I don't have an answer to that. This was a blind taste test for sure, and we had some of the creme de la creme in beer, if you will, in Chicago. And, you know, I guess tried and true to our Chicago palates, it was just the way to go.
Were the judges already drunk when the test started?
I can attest that they were not.
Okay.
And I can attest that trying to stay true to history and Royco's original taste test 50 years ago, we did provide them with some rye bread, summer sausage, and dill pickles, so they were well fed as well. So I think it was all a very, very just situation.
So they could cleanse the palate in between samples.
Right.
Okay. So just as they did in 1973, the judges rated each beer on a scale of 1, barely drinkable, to 5, great. I also noticed that Point Special from Stevens Point, Wisconsin, did very well 50 years ago, but came in last this year. Any idea why?
Yeah, dead last. Well, I mean, I'm sure it has to do. I mean, I don't really think that you can get Point so readily available in 2023 as you could in 1973. I think so. I think quality is probably one thing. I don't know if recipes have changed, and I think the biggest probably thing is that we have so many amazing beer options these days that our palate has probably evolved in a way. You know, we're pretty sophisticated in the kinds of tasting notes and impressions that we get on beverages. So I think we're a little bit further along than the gentlemen were 50 years ago, only because we have more and better options.
So some of the judges' comments here, the verbatims: Budweiser, inoffensive; Schlitz, a sad cat, whatever that means; Miller Lite, tastes like sadness; and Point Special, the aforementioned Point Special from Wisconsin, funky, cheesy, stinky, bad. I know you had some modern interpretations to Royco's test. How so?
Well, we definitely didn't just have a lot of macro beers. I mean, he had bigger American beer brands because that's all they really had available. So we chose some of those. I don't know if some people know that Miller Lite back in the day it was known as Meisterbrau by the Peter Hand Brewing Company. So when that was purchased by Miller, they rebranded to Miller Lite. So I'm sure the recipe is different by now, but we definitely try to stay straight true to history in that regard. And we certainly have some craft breweries present, and then we also did have some imports like Stiegel, Pilsner Urquell, Spaten. So we try to kind of do a little bit of a new roster inspired by what Mike had done in 73.
Talking here with Liz Garibay. She's the executive director of the Chicago Brewseum, which organized the event we're talking about. Happened last weekend at the Old Town Ale House. I know you're a nonprofit cultural organization. What's the mission of the Chicago Brewseum?
Yeah, we basically try to share stories about how beer has shaped humanity, past and present. I think if you look throughout history and you look around you today, you'll see that beer is an incredible dynamic cultural force with the power to bring people together and the ability to influence change. No matter where you look over space and time, that has been the case. And so we talk about these stories. So we're not in the this is how you make beer game. We're certainly more about the history and culture of the beverage.
Well, you have me on your side. I'm a big believer in the cultural significance of a cold, frosty one. What is your website, Liz?
You can find us at www.chicagobrewseum.org.
Okay. Well, thank you for putting this event together. I know you had some help from a couple other folks. I enjoyed the accordion player. I think she was a terrific addition to your event. Yeah,
I mean, the people who came together to make this happen is pretty remarkable. And, the takeaway, it was quite the success, and the takeaway was that was just the most incredible celebration of Chicago and Chicago tavern culture around. So we were excited to make it happen, and really thrilled that it was so well received.
And especially Mike Royko as the anchor. The Northwestern University professor Bill Savage, I know he told the crowd that Royko's columns should be considered literature, right up there like O. Henry stories, but with sharper edges. Same subject matter, Chicago, its people, power relationships, the strong against the weak against the strong, and everybody enjoying a beer from time to time.
100%. I mean, Mike was such a tavern culture guy. He grew up above one. And if you read any of his columns, which anyone who was in attendance got to hear them, Gary Houston read some versions of them and did it in quite a dramatic fashion, which brought them all to life. And Royko certainly understood what it meant to be a working class lover of drink and bar culture.
Liz, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. We appreciate it. Let me know about your next event.
Thanks so much. I sure will.
I've had magazine pieces done on me who like it. They always say, well, they always want me to go pose for a picture in Billy Goat's Tavern because it's a visual thing. On television, people say, let's conduct the interview in Billy Goat's Tavern. It doesn't matter if I haven't been in a tavern in 2 months or in Billy Goat's for 2 months. They want to go down there. That's okay. It really doesn't affect what my main concern, which is what winds up in my column.
The late, great Mike Royko. Let's go to Jason Nathanson, working for ABC News out in Los Angeles. We normally talk to him certainly on Fridays to talk about movies that are coming out over the weekend. Jason, thanks for your time this afternoon. Who wants Taylor Swift to postpone her concerts this late in the storyline?
These are striking hotel workers and a bunch of politicians who also signed on, including the Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis. And she's the highest ranking of the people who have signed on. Various board members here in Los Angeles as well. But mostly this started with hotel workers who wanted. And it actually started, I believe the movement started last week, but today, for whatever reason, it's getting a lot of notice. I think maybe because the concerts are coming tomorrow, so it wasn't totally last minute, but this is something that they've been trying to do and actually getting a lot more attention about today. And these hotel workers are on strike. Many say that they can't make a livable wage. Some have to sleep in their cars. They're risking losing their homes. They say that they're fighting for a living wage. And they're asking for Taylor Swift's support because as I think you saw in your city and many cities around the country, whenever this concert comes to town, it's a huge boom for the hotels. And they say that the hotels are going to be getting double and triple the rates over the next 6 nights. And the hotel workers aren't going to get any kind of piece of that. So they're hoping that Swift will stand in solidarity with them, though that's highly unlikely.
Well, I would think, and also she has to think about her fans and, the hoops they jump through to get a hold of the tickets and parents, the kids. I mean, has she responded at all? Any of her people?
Haven't heard anything from her about it. It's not going to happen. I mean, It's obviously very clearly not going to happen. But it gets their attention. It gets some national attention for their cause, the hotel workers, and gets them some publicity. So it's doing, I think, what they intended to do. I don't think they ever thought Swift would say, yeah, sure, I'm going to postpone my concerts, especially since these are the last 6 concerts on the leg of the tour, the North America part of the tour, at least. It's not like she could go on to another city and then come back. They know this. They know it was never going to happen, but it's getting us talking about it in Chicago today. So, that's part of their goal.
Just out of curiosity, ballpark figure, what are the aftermarket tickets going for Taylor Swift in L.A.?
I looked the other day because I was like, I wonder, because I saw I got an email from some site saying, hey, Taylor Swift's coming, get your tickets now. The cheapest, I think, and we're talking back of the stadium nosebleed, was $1,100. And then as you got down towards the floor, they were going for, I think, up for $6,000-$7,000, something like that.
Have you seen her in concert?
I've seen her before in concert. I didn't. This one I obviously have not seen because she's just starting in LA tomorrow. I didn't go to another city to see it. But back in, I think it was 2018 when she was playing just arenas, not stadiums. I went and saw her at what was then Staples Center in downtown Los Angeles and saw the show and, had a good time.
Jason Nathanson is here, ABC News entertainment correspondent from Los Angeles. What's the latest on the writers' strike and SAG-AFTRA?
Well, the latest on the writers' strike is that their talks are they're going to talk about talking with the writers in the studios. That's the latest that they said in a statement to the Writers Guild membership last night, that the AMPTP, who represents the studios, had reached out to the Writers Guild yesterday and requested a meeting on this Friday, to discuss negotiations. So they're going to talk about talking, and this will be the first time. Today is the 3-month anniversary of the start of that strike, the Writers Guild strike. So they have not been talking since, not officially at least, at the negotiating table. Back channel stuff in here and there, but not officially, because remember the AMPTP then immediately went on to go into negotiations with the directors and then with the actors as well. The directors got a deal. The actors obviously didn't. So their negotiators have been focusing on other things, and now I guess they have the bandwidth to try to sort things out again with the writers. But again, this is just talking about talking. So we know that both sides are very far apart, actors and writers and the studios. But hopefully it's a good sign that at least they're coming to the table and going to get talks started again, because again, it's been 3 months since they've sat at that table together.
Has Fran Dresser, the president of SAG-AFTRA, she gave a stem winder early in the strike, the SAG-AFTRA strike. I haven't heard much from her recently. Have you?
Oh, yeah. She's been on the picket lines. She's been in New York. She's been in Los Angeles. She's been here. She's been there. She's been everywhere, talking the same stuff and, getting out there and getting in front of things as best she can. So she is out there and on the lines. She's
a firebrand. This is a city that has a long history with union organizers, obviously. It seems like she could fit right in here in Chicago.
Yeah, probably.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the time. Jason Nathanson out in Los Angeles. Have a great afternoon, sir.
You too. Take care.
And here is President Nanny from SAG-AFTRA.
How far apart we are on so many things. How they plead poverty, that they're losing money left and right when giving hundreds of millions of dollars to their CEOs. It is disgusting. Shame on them. They stand on the wrong side of history at this very moment.
Well, we shall see.
John Howell, Essential Cuts. Check back every weekday for another episode of John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.